So, I grew up in this very large family. And what's interesting about growing up in a large family is how different. So there's 8 of us, and we are very, very different 8 people. But you can break us into groups a little bit, okay? So in my family, I like to call them the Brainiacs. And the Brainiacs, I just always looked up to them because they just were so smart. So this is like the math, science, technology side of my family. And these people, went on to become engineers and accountants. And literally my brother runs a nuclear plant. I pray for his success at his job every day because if he doesn't do his job well, we're in trouble. Right? And then the other side, and it's 4 and 4. We became, teachers and pastors and counselors. That's the one side of the family. And the other side, they just understood all that stuff. And as a kid, it was great because even though I definitely was not on that side, I didn't get that set of the genes, I got to play with all the toys. My brother, those of us who grew up in the 70s, remember that there were not video games. Video games were just coming out, right? And remember the first one is you basically played tennis. You move this thing, and then it bounced back, right? Yeah, it was fun too, wasn't it, right? We had a good time with that. I got to play that 2 or 3 years before everybody else because my brother figured out how to, he took an old TV, he went to Radio Shack, I just need this and this and that and the other thing, and I was playing Pong long before anybody else. And the other thing is, they had these cool stuff. Like my one brother, the nuclear engineer, who literally does keep us all safe and our lights on, he loved, and still loves to this day, just looking up into the sky. And so he built something about that side, and those of you who have that gift, you love to tinker and build stuff too, right? That's part of having that gift. So he built his own. If I just build my own telescope, it'll be 10 times more powerful than anything I can get in the store. So of course that's what he does, and he builds it. And I remember we would go, going outside in the middle of a summer night, and him pushing that up there and just being able to see incredible stuff. And then my other brother had this microscope and all the chemicals too that came along with it, right? Because Joe, you can't play with them, man. It's just you can look through, but don't play with the chemicals, right? And so as we come and we conclude this series on the Gospel of Luke, I want us to think of the telescope and the microscope a little bit. And there's just really 2 ways of seeing the world. And there are 2 ways that are really important ways of seeing the world. The telescope gives us the big picture, helps us understand, right, all that's going on. And the microscope then zooms us in on life. So today, as we come to our gospel reading, of course, we're in the Gospel of Luke. We're finishing up the Gospel of Luke. And I want you to focus on the big picture, and then notice the disciples that are focusing on the little picture. You may remember as we've been going through this, I know a lot of you followed along with this, and you have these questions that we use on the back. So here's my encouragement. If you didn't get one of these yet, go ahead and get one. But if you haven't, hang on to it for the questions that we can use when we're going through and we're reading the gospel. So today, as we read this, I want you to notice that the disciples focus inward. And the disciples, they've got their little picture of what's going on. And Jesus kind of hits the pause button with them and says, wait, let's look big picture. So here we are. If you were with us last week, we had an awesome presentation by our Associate Pastor Phil, who gave us this beautiful vision of the Last Supper. And in his vision of the Last Supper that he gave us, he pointed out to us, very importantly, the diversity at the table. All these different people who shouldn't be getting along, who shouldn't be friends in real life, are friends through Christ. That's what we want to be as a church. We want everybody at the table together, and we want the diverse opinions, and we want the scientists to hang out with the pastors and the counselors, and we want them to teach each other and help each other and grow each other. But as we come today now, so we left off at the Last Supper. And since we left off, what's happened? Jesus has been crucified. He's been executed. It was a form of state-sponsored terrorism. It was the Romans trying to terrorize the Jewish people into submission. So that's happened. Jesus has been buried. That's happened. Now, 3 days later, there's reports that the tomb is empty. And we see a couple of the disciples leaving Jerusalem now, trying to figure out what's going on. And the story from Luke 24 goes like this. Now that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the 3rd day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but they did not see him." Let me pause here for a second. Somebody asked this morning as they came in, "So how is Jesus feeling today?" You may remember we had a day where we talked about Jesus being angry. We talked about Jesus being sad. Right now, if you want to get how is Jesus feeling today, just do the thing that the kids today do with the head plant, right? With the palm plant here, like he's like, "Seriously? Really? This is how Jesus is feeling today. Like, you don't get it." He said to them, "How foolish you are. How slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. As the disciples deal with Jesus' death, well, kind of what happens is all those differences fade away, and they all together as one are downcast and sad and bitter and losing hope. But we had hoped he was the one who was going to save us from all this. And Jesus pauses after doing that and says, "Wait, let me show you what's going on." So Jesus pulls out the telescope and he says, "Wait, we got to look at the big picture. We got to see what's happening." And so, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he tells these 2 disciples as they're walking along, "Look, here is what is in our scriptures. Here's what it says. Here's how we understand it. Here's how we get it to make sense." And so, what he shows them is the big picture. Now, I'm going to go through the big picture a little bit quickly. And as I go through the big picture a little bit quickly, it's because for a lot of us, you're like, "Wait, I know the big picture." And it's important that yes, we know it, yes, we understand it, but that it becomes a part of us, and that we understand it. So first, I'm sure as Jesus backed up and showed them everything that was going on, what did he say? Hey, you remember how it was in the beginning? We were created in love, and it was good. You're part of that creation. You're part of that goodness. You're part of that beauty of the world. And then, as Jesus is saying that to them as they're walking along, he's only a couple of pages into the book. And the book is like this thick. And then the rest of the book, right, we have this issue of we get lost in sin. We get taken out of the goodness by how we live our lives. Not just how we live our lives, but how everybody around us lives their lives. We have the problem of the sin that we do, and we have the problem of the sin that's done to us, and the problem of the sin that exists in our society and in our world. And so this is the point now, when we understand the big story, that we start to have problems. And we have problems in our modern world. Because this is where people disconnect from us. Why do you Christians are so negative? Why do you gotta be so down? Why always gotta be talking about sin? Ugh. Can't you just be more upbeat? And the problem is, I prefer not to see us as down. I prefer to see us as realists. That we do live in a world where there's evil, and we do participate in that evil sometimes ourselves, and worse than participating, sometimes we're the engine that brings it into the world. Sometimes we're the problem. And that big picture of the world being broken by sin is important for us to always keep in the back of our mind. And again, going to the realist, if we're not willing, if in the name of self-esteem or being positive or thinking, however you want to say it, if in the name of all that we can't be real about who we are, then we can't get at the problem. Amen. We can, what we can do is we can pretend that the problem isn't there. Which, I just missed the self-esteem thing. It hadn't gotten to schools yet, and probably since I went to Catholic schools, it maybe it's not even there yet. But anyways, I missed that thing, right? And it was more, you misbehave and we're gonna smack you, and they did. And I'm not saying that it's about punishing ourselves, but it's about not pretending either. The solution was not hitting me. It also wasn't telling me, I'm all that in a bag of chips, right? The solution was maybe helping me guide my, very rambunctious self into better pursuits. And what we do as humans, we swing the pendulum. We go from, we got to beat it into them to we just got to tell them everything's hunky-dory fine. And they're wonderful. And so when I was studying education, that's where the education, and I'm like, something in the back of my mind is like, yeah, but I know we're supposed to build them up and make them feel good, but can we have some reality here? And I think what we do, I hope what we do as Christians is we bring it back to the reality. The reality is, yes, we are good, and we are created in the image of God, and that is beautiful. And the reality is that sometimes we live into the evil in the world. And that's the problem. And the only way to solve the problem is by admitting a problem. One, after I talk about how the Catholics beat it into me, I'm going to give you some of the healing in my life from a Catholic priest by the name of Richard Rohr, who's a great writer and understands this stuff. But he says it very simply. He wrote this book about understanding the 12 steps through spirituality, right? And it's called breathing underwater. And in it, he says this: you cannot heal what you do not first acknowledge. I know it's very simple, right? You cannot heal what you do not first acknowledge. As Christians, we acknowledge that we are sinners and we need healing. And that isn't because we're down and we're, want to beat people up. It's because we want to be real about who we are and we want to open ourselves to all that God has for us. And that leads us then to figuring out, right, what we need to die to, what we need to get rid of. So Rohr goes on to say, letting go is not anybody's program for happiness. Which is why people if I say I'm a sinner, if I'm willing to admit that, well, then that means there's something in me that needs to die, that needs to go away, that needs to be redeemed and reformed by Jesus Christ. Easier to say, I'm fine. I'm good. I'm not perfect, but none of us are. And so now, if that was the end of the Christian story, it's not good news. It's not good news, right? You're a sinner. Deal with it. Be a realist. How's that working for you, right? If that's it, if we're done at that, this is not good news, but it is good news. Because when you look at the big picture, the story keeps evolving, right? The story keeps going. So, we are redeemed by love. The big picture is we're created in love, we get lost in sin, we lose our way, but the God of the universe, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, loves you enough, loves me enough, that he redeems us, he buys us back, he helps us, he molds us, he grows us, he shapes us. We are redeemed by love. And it's a costly love. It's a love that deals with our sins. So Jesus explains to them, starting with Moses and what? All the prophets. Can almost guarantee in that long walk, right? Those of you who have done the 3-day or the 31 miles, or you've done it, okay, that walk probably took them a couple hours, right? 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours if they stopped to do a water break. I know they didn't have the stations like we get, but right, if they stopped, during those 2 hours, Jesus would have had time to go into this passage right here and to go into the gospel, to the prophet Isaiah. And this is what hundreds of years before Jesus walked on this earth, Isaiah said, this is what the Messiah will look like. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering because we were lost in sin. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And by his wounds, we are healed. By his wounds, we are healed. So we're redeemed by that love. And we're being sanctified, renewed for love. So, one mistake that we make as Christians now is we say, we've been redeemed by God, and we have this, we kind of jump to the future. All right? Have you been saved? Yes, I've been saved. I've given my life to Jesus Christ. I've been redeemed. And someday I'll be in heaven. What happens between that day when you say, yes, I'm giving my life to Jesus Christ, and you make a statement in front of a church, or right? And the day you go to heaven, you're still being redeemed. The redeeming is still happening. You're still being saved. God is still working in your life. Why? Why does God still have to work in my life? Because I'm lost in sin too. And I would like it if, right, just click my fingers and, oh, that's all done with. But we're realists. this as Christians. It takes a while. It takes a while, right? For me, it's taking a while. I've been on this journey for decades now, and I keep being shocked that God still has to work on me. But then, I thank God that he's still working on me. And I remember the words of 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, thankfully. Love is kind, thankfully. Because I need that patience and I need that kindness of a loving God. Am I the only one? Probably not. We are being sanctified, renewed for love. Notice the back half. We've been created in love, we've been redeemed by love, and now we're being sanctified, which just means renewed, right? And we're being renewed for love. It's a giant game of tag, you're it. And you go out and you love. But if I love without God doing his work in me, it doesn't work. And so now, this wouldn't be a scripture that Jesus would have quoted to them. But this idea, in that couple of hours, 2 to 2.5 hours that they're walking along that road, he would have, look, I am making everything new. The Messiah makes everything new. The Messiah makes you new. The Messiah makes me new. And it might take a while, and that's okay, because God is patient with us and he keeps working with us. So that's the big picture. And now the little picture. The little picture, go back to these questions, hang on to them. So my prayer is that this becomes part of how we read the Bible now. Like we're looking through these different lenses, and it informs our reading. But as we come to the little picture, and we come to the call of faith, okay, created in love, lost in sin, redeemed by love, renewed for love. Ask yourself one simple question. How is that story playing out in me? If you are getting discouraged because you say, I feel like I could keep, making the same mistakes or getting caught, right? How is that story playing out in you? Is God needing to be patient with you and kind with you? Welcome to the family, right? That's everybody. And how is God needing to be patient and kind with you now? Start with the realism that Roar gives us, right? I got to admit it, and then I got to figure out what I got to let go of. So how is that story playing out in me, right? Notice, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. What we do with that, what I do with that, don't you? You read that and you say, well, God's somehow supernaturally keeping their eyes from seeing. But I don't know that you can get that. I haven't really found a commentator to say, well, yeah, that's actually what's happening. Notice that their eyes are downcast. I'm not saying they walked 7 miles with their eyes downcast, but what I'm saying is there is some very real way where their own nonsense keeps them from being able to see Christ. And we saw this over the last 10 weeks as we went through the series, right? The opponents, remember the opponents question. The opponents, what do they see? They see that they're good, that they're all right. There's no problems with them. They're like our self-esteem people, right? They can't admit that they need God because they're doing everything right. And so that's one group. They were kept from recognizing Jesus because they thought they didn't need Jesus because they thought they had it all together. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that person who holds on to the truth that I'm created in the image of God but can't admit the sin in my life. So that keeps the Pharisees. You remember we talked about the Pharisees. Those were the opponents. That keeps them from recognizing Jesus. What kept the disciples from recognizing Jesus was what? They didn't want to right? Jesus would say, hey, I'm going to suffer and die. Come follow me. And their response was, what? That's not going to happen to you. You're not going to go through that. And here's the thing. If we're going to follow Christ, I know I've used this a lot of times, but it works, right? He didn't say, come follow me, and then hop in his car and drive down 75 to Disney World, right? He went to the cross. And he went to the cross to deal with sin, and he dealt with sin on our behalf. But as he pulls that sin out of our lives, you're going to be letting go. You're going to be letting go of some greed. You're going to be letting go of some envy. You're going to be letting go of a lot of pride. A lot of pride. You can tell which one he's working out of me. A lot of pride. And does it feel good to let go of the pride? Right? No, because that pride, what does that pride do in us, right? It's good to be right, isn't it? Pump up. I know it all. Good for me. And so they're kept from recognizing our Pharisee friends because they want to be part of the self-esteem movement. There's nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong with that guy, but not with me. And the disciples from, okay, I just don't want it to be hard, Lord. I don't want to take up my cross and follow you. That's not how it works. You got a better plan than that, right? Which is why we go from salvation to heaven and we forget everything that happens in between. Isn't that easy? Isn't that why we do that? Right? Because that would be better. Yes, I'm in heaven, and someday I'll be there. And God doesn't have to do I don't have to let go of anything in the meantime. I don't have to let go of my pride, my envy, my greed, my lust, my me. Letting go is not anybody's program for happiness, except for Jesus. And yet, all mature spirituality, in one sense or another, is about letting go and owning. It's about letting go of my pride, my anger, my bitterness, my need to be right. Now, what's your list? So what is keeping me from seeing it? Am I like the Pharisees? Am I like the disciples? And finally, how will I embrace the story? That is God. Now, you're doing it. You're doing it. Right? You show up. You lift your voices in praise. And Jen was right. Because when I'm like there, so I get to hear all of you and them, it's a good spot. You should try it sometime. Because all of you guys behind singing and them in front singing, it's like, oh, perfect. Right? But in that, in singing about that truth and about that love, you're transforming. You're offering yourself up to God. And when you do the 20 miles 3 days in a row, and you do the 31 miles, and you go to that jail, and you hang out with those foster kids, and you go to downtown outreach, and you just keep connecting with everybody in the church forever. I'm talking to you, Bob and Joanne, right? And all the people who head up the 12-step, right? You're doing it. When you say, I want my church to be a more beautiful place, so I'll put in some trees and a nice walkway, you're doing it. You're doing it. And you say, I'll hang out with the youth. I'm going to try to get to everybody, but we'll be here. I'll go over. But anyways, you're doing it. You're doing it. And keep doing it. And keep embracing it. And keep walking into it. and keep praising the name of the Lord our God. Praise his name forever, right? Because then we're in the story. Then we're in the middle of the story. And there's no better place than it.